I'm Charlotte Iserbyt. I'm the author of The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, which you can get at Amazon.com, the updated version and abridged. And you can also get the free download, which is fantastic, on the internet at deliberatedumbingdown.com. And I could go on and on. We don't work with William Bennett. We don't work with the neoconservatives because they are the Trojan horse at the moment. They are introducing the charter schools, the school choice, and we have to understand that although many of them may not understand what they're doing, they are the Trojan horse to change our form of government, believe it or not, through unelected councils. The unelected council system, very important. That's the Soviet system. We're going to be nothing but animals to be trained, and we will have no conscience, no soul, no thinking, no nothing. We will be, as C.S. Lewis said, he said, once training beats education, civilization dies. He wrote The Abolition of Man. He understood this. We are dealing with something more important than anything we've ever dealt with before in this country. Thomas Sticht, who was with William Spady, very important man with Skinner, mastery learning, etc., and all the kids in the D.C. school district, absolutely fell apart. The school fell apart after this program that Spady and Sticht put in. And the Washington Post in 1987 paraphrased Sticht's comment, and it follows. It says, many, and think of this in terms of the corporations that are running our whole life now and want all the charter schools. They're putting in all their horrible charter schools. He said, many companies have moved operations to places with cheap, relatively poorly educated labor. What may be crucial, they say, is the dependability of a labor force and how well it can be managed and trained, not its general educational level. Although a small cadre of highly educated, creative people is essential to innovation and growth. Ending discrimination and changing values are probably more important than reading in moving low-income families into the middle class. Direct instruction. Talk about semantic deception. It sounds so good. I mean, I still have friends who are good teachers who can't get it. They say, well, that means just teaching in front of the class directly. They don't know that it's Skinner, it's operant conditioning. And it fits beautifully. There's no system that fits in the computer for software for education other, I think, challenge me if I'm wrong, it goes in the computer software other than Skinner. And he said it. He said, it's my box.
I have a point of view that education is for the intrinsic enhancement of the individual, because the individual can then continue the culture instead of having limited learning for lifelong labor, which is where we're going now. And that's what school to work is. That's what school choice is. That's what the linking of schools and business and industry is. And when my team is going towards the wrong goal, I'm not going there. I'm going to say, hey guys, we need to go this way. And I lobbied against that proposition, and with Christian schools in our state, not to vote for or support voucher legislation, because the single dollar they took was going to control their school. Once you take a government dollar, you have to meet government standards. I ran across something called Visions, which was a newsletter put out by the Pacific Telesis Education Foundation in California. And in their little publication called Beyond the Bubble, they had a blurb that described, what different terms were, and that says educators are finding that new ways of teaching requires new forms of, and they had in quotations, assessment. Then, on their definition of assessment, it said, the act or result of judging the worth or value of something or someone.
Parents see charters as better for their children. And in some cases, a few are pretty good. But the big picture is not as good. Charter schools regulations vary widely from state to state. There's very little oversight or control once they are in place. Are they public or are they private? Is there any transparency? Do you have freedom of information access? And how many are secular charters? That's a question. CRADO, the Center for Research on Education Outcomes in Stanford, they did a study of 16 states. And as I was printing these out, I would take them out of the printer, and I thought that I had the page upside down because most of the results were down below where they started. The results were not good. There are powerful people behind the funding and driving this whole system forward.
They'll take the elementary and the middle and the high school, and they'll turn the whole community into a charter school community. And so the parents lose their neighborhood school that they've had forever. I mean, some of those Austin ISD's East Side schools go back into the 20s, to the teens probably. I mean, when Austin first started, you got to figure that area just east of I-35 was a predominantly run area. I mean, it was a thriving part of the Austin community. So it's been there forever. And those schools have been there forever, educating the kids adequately until they were told what the standards were going to be. What Texas is doing, in order to be able to offer vouchers to the public, they have to change the taxing structure. Right now, public school districts control the property tax end of that taxing authority. If they can change that and get control of that, the state does not control that now, the local school district does. They can't offer what they don't control. So in the 2013 Texas legislature, in the House, and the Senate, I'm sure, property taxes are going to be talked about as an exchange for a new sales tax. So you won't have a property tax on your home, but you'll pay a higher sales tax. Then they will control all the taxes, and then they can offer vouchers. That's how it's operating.
But when they put my eldest daughter into an experimental class without my knowledge or consent, and some of these things that have been talked about today started coming home, I got very angry. They were messing with my kids now. We replaced the school committee with our people. We implemented Phonics First policy, thanks to many of us, a commissioner that believed in us, Sam Blumenfeld, who came down several times to our town. We lobbied at the State House and helped pass the Parents' Rights Bill. We had the superintendent out of Sundance in 24 hours. We closed down the regional training center. We killed the regional dump, and we saved Plymouth County for the time being. Well, the cell phones have presented a monumental problem in every classroom and across all districts, and it creates I call it Lord of the Flies. It creates a whole child world without parents. And it goes on 24 hours.
They allow them in the classroom?
Well, they could text, they put them in their purse. One mother came in, I said, a teacher says she suspects she's testing, and the father checked out. She got 4,000 texts in 1 month during school hours. We'd like to see the cell towers go down, quite frankly, because we can't, and as parents, I can tell you that it does separate a child from their family. Intense, more than anything else that could be done. That has done it.
I had protested social promotion, new grouping methods, the whole word teaching instruction, marking on a curve, intrusive surveys, modern math, faulty textbooks. Each proposed change seemed to be a singular excrescence. I never dreamed that it was part of the plan to remove God from our lives, to weaken families, or to dumb down and stupefy American citizens and foreign students in our colleges and universities, our once vaunted system of education.
International Baccalaureate does not belong in public schools. And while higher cost is a big problem, it's what IB is, does, or fails to do that is of greater concern. This became apparent during my research that was initiated in part because of my history. During the 11th and 12th grade, I lived outside the United States and attended a private K-12 international school with students from many countries. There was no International Baccalaureate program. The high school standards supported admission into the top U.S. higher education institutions. Years after I graduated from the international school, IB appeared as an option, and I wondered why. Given my background, I might have welcomed IB, but as I learned more about the program, it was obvious that IB intends to create a particular kind of global citizen. The IB brand is troubling. It supports UN issues such as Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, disarmament under the guise of peace, a collectivist view of social justice, a consensus-building type of civic engagement, and more. Cloaked in utopian feel-good jargon, the UN system is communitarian in nature, or communist. Communitarian being communist. Strip away the high-sounding rhetoric, and what comes into view is central planning for all aspects of life, from cradle to grave.
All of the human potential methods were being piloted. And part of that was self and group criticism recorded in those little scraps of paper. The undermining of her religious faith came from an exercise where students had to stand in front of the class to explain why they believed what they believed as the classmates challenged them. So this mother tiger awakened and roared. I still thought it was an isolated situation, but it soon became apparent that it was something much bigger. We peeled away and discovered PPBS, Planning, Programming, Budgeting System. Management form of governance had been superimposed over our constitutional representative republic without a shot being fired. 1971, an astute California Assemblyman, Robert Burke, prepared a report about PPBS. The report redefined education, and this is his report, which was titled Education from the Acquisition of Knowledge to Programmed Conditioned Response. Direct instruction. That about says it all, doesn't it? It says, in it, he spelled out what we see coming to fruition today, which I'm sure others will cover. Assemblyman Burke wrote in a newsletter early in the 70s, quote, this insidious plan already has widespread support in many quarters. Left unchecked, the consequences will be unimagined amount of power and control over society in the hands of a few.
You should know that the planned, deliberate dumbing down of America was started in 1898. See how far back it goes? 1898. By socialist John Dewey. It was started by John Dewey in 1898 with his attack on the primary school's emphasis on teaching children to read. This emphasis sustained the capitalist, individualistic system, and it produced high literacy, whereby the average American could read anything and think for himself. What Dewey deliberately ignored was the tremendous language learning faculty that every child is born with, and that teaching a child to read at that early age expands the child's mastery of language, which is the key to academic success. You know, we all have that faculty. It's in the left lobe of our brains. It's been put there by the good Lord. Dewey and his socialist colleagues were determined to change individualistic America into a collectivist society. Did they know that their new teaching methods would create reading disability and dyslexia? They found out pretty early at the expense of 4 of the richest boys in America. Believe it or not, John D. Rockefeller Jr. was a great admirer of John Dewey, and he put his 4 sons, Nelson, David, Lawrence, and Winthrop, in the Lincoln School, one of the experimental schools called for by Dewey. Rockefeller donated over $3 million. $3 million in those days is about $300 million today, you know. He donated $3 million to the school, and what was the result? All 4 boys became dyslexic. But of course, that didn't stop the progressives from implementing their plan. Incidentally, when Nelson was governor of New York, he wrote in the Reading Teacher of March 1972, quote, "I appreciate the opportunity to make some observations on the importance of reading, for I am a prime example of one who has had to struggle with the handicap of being a poor reader while serving in public office. On many occasions," he writes, "upon confronting an audience, I have elected to announce that I have thrown away my speech in favor of giving the audience the benefit of my spontaneous thoughts. And usually I have added, besides, I went to a progressive school and don't read very well anyhow. This, of course, is a trial to my very able speechwriter, as well as a libel upon all of the devoted teachers and professors who saw me through the years of my formal education. It is also usually a rather popular device to communicate with the audience on a much more intimate basis, but the truth is that it serves primarily to cover the fact that I really wish I could do a better job of reading a speech or other public statement," unquote. And this man was going to become, he was vice president of the United States and was a heartbeat away from the presidency, a functional illiterate, a dyslexic. You know who read his books for him? Kissinger. So he hired Henry Kissinger to do his reading for him, or tell him what was in the books. Yeah. So as you know, Nelson Rockefeller was vice president under Ford. In other words, a functional illiterate was a heartbeat from becoming president. David Rockefeller writes in his memoirs, quote, now this is the head of the Bilderbergers, David Rockefeller. This is what he says in his memoirs, quote, "It was Lincoln's experimental curriculum and method of instruction that distinguished it from all other New York schools at the time. Father was an ardent and generous supporter of John Dewey's educational methods and school reform efforts. Teachers College of Columbia University operated Lincoln with considerable financial assistance in the early years from the General Education Board as an experimental school designed to put Dewey's philosophy into practice. Lincoln stressed freedom for children to learn and to play an active role in their own education. But there were some drawbacks. In my case, I had trouble with reading and spelling, which my teachers, drawing upon progressive education theory, did not consider significant. They believed I was simply a slow reader and that I would develop at my own pace. In reality, I have dyslexia, which was never diagnosed, and I never received remedial attention. As a result, my reading ability, as well as my proficiency in spelling, improved only marginally as I grew older. All my siblings, except Babs, that is his sister, and John, had dyslexia to a degree.
I was asked to sign a statement, and a lot of people will call me a liar, but I have witnesses, that promised I would pledge to teach the mission of world government. And even though the public education had always been tainted with a political bias, I finally was able to connect this political agenda directly to the UN. And now I knew why every other word in our retraining was global, global, global. I just felt like something I had read about in Cuba, you know, when you're watched and principal will be peeking in your window, like around Christmas time, how much you want to bet? And I was only half kidding. I said, how much you want to bet the principal's going to call us down for a short meeting and he's going to tell us we can't celebrate Christmas, but we should worship the winter solstice. So one day, the intercom, come down to the music room just for 5 minutes after the kids leave, puts a chair in the middle of the room and says, we have to start thinking about not celebrating Christmas in school. We'll have to, it's okay if you celebrate the winter solstice, but not Christmas. And then those of us who were, going to be rebels, I still put up greenery. It was nothing religious ever, just, wreaths or something to decorate the room, because the kids would say, where are the Christmas decorations? And I had to fill out a form explaining what everything was. So I said, two can play this game. I wrote down, these green trees and wreaths are not to be construed as Christmas decorations because they're not.
But the most important part of my speech is this statement. A false friend is more dangerous than an open enemy. And that's what we're fighting, the false friends. Vouchers and education choice originally came from the left and was sold to the right. Now both the right and left support this shift in emphasis from academics to workforce training. This is proven by the fact the elite from both parties, including the globalist New World Order, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, if you go on News with Views and read Erica Carl's 3-part article on the Chamber, you'll find out exactly what they are. The International Aspen Institute, of which UN Agenda Maurice, he pronounces it Morris, Strong was director. President Obama, his Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, the Heritage Foundation, and all other neocon Trotskyite groups, and the Globalist Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you, Sam, for the prelude to that. Founded in 1921 by the global-minded Rockefellers. All of them support charter and vouchers.
That these are nations that are regulating, restricting, monitoring, managing, spying, finding out everything about our water system, our energy system, our transportation system, doing everything that can be done to restrict our access and ability to use our resources. So, what's the goal? It is using the green mask, what I call the greenhouse gas mask, of environmental concern. This is a hijacking of the environmental movement, very clearly. The two parts of Agenda 21 are imposed on us, and that is smart growth, moving populations into concentrated city centers for surveillance purposes and monitoring and manipulation, and the wildlands, which is getting people out of the rural and suburban areas, blocking access to wilderness roads and resources, and shifting land ownership from private to public, taking the land away from the people. Now, the way this is done is right in your town.
The global road to ruin through education leads to consolidation, choice, and charterization, which is taxation without representation through government by councils of selection, not election. The global road to ruin leads through education. Education that should be for the intrinsic enhancement of the individual so that he or she can communicate and continue the culture, not for limited learning, for lifelong labor.